You know what I'm pleased about with all this though, like the firing of Alonso and just this. There's no hiding it now. There's no hiding the fact that like the MCU isn't in deep trouble because up until fairly recently there was just this blanket denial. It's like no, it's fine. The movies are still making so much money. People love
Mhm.
it. You can't criticize it. That's ridiculous. Now there's just an open admission. If even the trades are talking about the problems with the MCU, you know it's bad. And
Oh,
they know it's bad. They know that they're in trouble and they can't hide it anymore.
when
We
Bob Iger comes out and says we're going to prioritize quality over quantity, that's
right?
pretty much your indictment right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And
Damn.
hey, we were the canary in the coal mine for fucking like 5 years. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Don't say we didn't warn you.
bigot canaries hanging out in coal mines.
Oh,
That's
you guys are going to notice over the next.
Schadenfreude is a fantastic word, and
It
it's like
is.
I'm experiencing a lot of it right now.
I was going to say, you guys are going to notice over the next 2-3 years here, there's going to be a lot of folks on the other side who are going to be like, we need to quit this woke stuff. We need to quit this. It's just separating. They're going to say all the same that we've been saying for the last 5 years.
Oh,
And they're
yeah.
going to act like they invented it.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Bill
there's
Maher's
good-
been doing that for a year now. So
Well, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people, like actors and stuff, when it's safe to do so, will be like, oh, I was never really in favor of this stuff. I was always uncomfortable with it, but, I felt like I had to go along with it. It's like, yeah, fuck off. Like, you absolutely chose your side when it was popular.
Well, it was just yesterday, wasn't it? Anna, what's her name? Kasparian or whatever the hell her name is from the Young Turks.
Oh yeah.
She was going out there. Did you see that, Gary?
Yes,
Yeah.
That's funny.
She got raked over the coals because she was starting to talk about women's rights. I can't remember exact quote, but yeah, I don't want to get into it anyway for the politics of it all, but like, yeah, it's getting there. We're getting to that point where a lot of these folks, I even saw an interview with Sean Penn where he was talking about like, he didn't quite understand a lot of this, pronoun bullshit and all this other stuff. And yeah, I don't get it. It's a little weird. And then, but until they start to say something different, nothing's going to change, unfortunately. We could sit here and talk till we're blue in the face, and they ain't going to listen to us because we're istophobes. So,
yeah, they've managed to put us in that corner. Lucasfilm rewriting Ripley, we all know about that. Supported by Pablo Hidalgo, who was the lead, executive and member of the story group. They have gone out of their way to silence critics when secretly they knew their stuff was shit, and because they were pushing an agenda, and now because the money has run out, not because they've seen they've seen the light, which I would prefer. It's
right.
like, oh, maybe we went a little bit too hard on that one. No, it's we're broke and we can't support, and it just proves that all this virtue signaling BS has been BS, like we've been saying.
Well, yeah, but did Kevin Feige not come out and say, we're not going to back off from all of this stuff, like all this virtue signaling, all the political stuff. We just have to get better at disguising it and so people don't pick up on it quite as much. And it's like, well, that's not really fixing the problem, Kevin. That's just like, covering it up a little bit.
So, how long are you going to sing that tune when your films are starting to flop again and again and again? I wonder. Sorry, capitalism kicks in eventually.
Well,
your stockholders are going to be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like,
the thing is, once you get that adversarial attitude amongst the fans towards your own company and the products you're putting out, it's really difficult to turn that around.
It's already dead, essentially, unless you course correct quickly. And Star Wars had course corrected in 2018, and Marvel course corrected in 2019. It might be different, but when you let it go too long, it damages your brand. But their hubris is, no, Marvel is now that red rectangle with the Marvel in it, and it's not what it really is. Spider-Man, X-Men, and the MCU, to their credit, did the impossible and took two B-list characters, Iron Man and Captain America, I'll even say Black Panther and Thor, and turned them into household names where everybody knows who they are, and then they didn't recast them and killed them all off and made them fat. It's like they're dumb. They're just dumb. They're dumb Hollywood executives, and they think, well, we could just restart this at any time. No, you had your one chance, and now it's gone. Apathy will set in, and there's really no coming back from that. People will move on. We've got I've seen the chat mentioning it today. We got a movie that is being, positively reviewed. A couple of my friends have seen it and said it kicks ass. John Wick 4, it's just your basic action movie, and those are a lot cheaper to make.
Yep.
Oh yeah. This is what makes me question, actually, like how much longer this genre has to go. I mean, I mentioned this in my Shazam 2 review. Like, I feel like the comic book industry now, or the comic book movie, is going into its twilight years. You know, it's never going to die completely, but it's going to get harder and harder to really get like tentpole movies that people are excited about, because so many things have been done already and so many people are just kind of burned out with it. You can't just produce generic, like, standard boilerplate comic book films anymore, superhero films, and expect people to get excited. That time has ended.
They probably could have gone a lot longer if they hadn't made because like it's incredible they managed to make so much shit in a row. Look at all of Phase 4. Like, a lot of industries and IPs don't get away with that.
Victoria Alonso.
No, you're 100% right, Mahler. And I've argued that too. It's not superhero movie fatigue. It's just bad movie fatigue, is what it is.
Well, Razor Fist made a really good video about this recently, where he said, like, well, yeah, but like that fatigue comes in a lot quicker when you make shit stuff. Like,
exactly.
Not mutually exclusive. Like he pointed out that even after the westerns were done, we still got Outlaw Josie Wales. We got like some really good westerns. You know?
Well, I think,
and I agree with him, but I would compare it not so much to the westerns, but the big budget Hollywood movie. Because you got to remember, this is more like when we were hitting the end of the 60s and into the 70s, right? Because the studios were spending ungodly amounts of money on shit like Cleopatra and Paint Your Wagon.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they were spending.
What was the big difference between the 70s and the 60s is the equipment got cheaper.
Yes, and we're in the same space now. Like, and that's what I'm saying. It's very comparable. Like, I mean, I get the Western analogy, and I don't say it's completely wrong, but I compare it just more to this idea of these big, bloated movies that Hollywood used to feed us. And I think it was Tarantino who basically said, you know, we got sick and tired of fucking musicals and, you know, these big bloated Westerns that nobody gave a shit about. You know, we wanted something real, and that's where Exorcist, Taxi Driver, Godfather, Rosemary's Baby, all these movies, Easy Rider, ushered in a brand new era. So we're on the cusp of that, but I don't know what it's going to be yet. And Marvel, I would compare that more to those kind of movies. Like, we've come past this point where it has saturated the market so much. It's even worse than Westerns, because Westerns were still just a genre. Like, the superhero movies have taken over almost everything. And why? You know, it probably is, Gary. It's probably Westerns again, because look at what Yellowstone's doing, right? All the Taylor Sheridan shows are taking off. And what do they have in common most? They're like the old classic Western shows back in the day, like Bonanza and Up Through Dallas. And then you also have like stuff like Tulsa King, which is more like the old school kind of like procedural shows we used to get back in the 70s and 80s in a way.
Great show. Great.
Yeah. And maybe that's where we're headed.
Yellowstone, I really like.
Yeah. Have you seen Tulsa King yet? Critical.
No,
Tulsa
King's
I want to finish amazing, man.
So I like Quentin Tarantino, but he's not the be all end all. He said that he's one of the worst aries of movies, and he's totally full of shit on that.
Did you read his book though, Gary? And I understand why he said that now.
Well, yeah, because what I saw in an interview, and he was talking.
Yeah, I know.
I think we did get some good film in the 70s. We got some classic like that. That's kind of a golden age, but it was also like just so much fucking nihilism in the 70s, and we're re-experiencing that nihilism now. And it was the 80s that brought back a lot of positivity and fun that maybe just not to Quentin's taste. That's
yeah. It was the 70s. Like, it was kind of defined by, like, you know, economic problems, like Vietnam, like kind of coming out of that.
I lived it. Yeah, it was dark.
Yeah, well, and just real quick, the 80s thing, because I've read his book, and in the book he gives a lot more context to it, and I agree with him more, because he's not saying that all the movies were bad. What happened is when you came out of the 70s, he was like, they were afraid to take chances in the 80s. Everything was so much like the 50s, where everything had, even if you had an inexplicable ending that didn't make any goddamn sense, as long as it was a happy ending. And he's like, the audience is right. He's like, I can't argue with the audience. They wanted to feel good when they came out of those movies. They didn't want Taxi Driver anymore in the 80s. They wanted Top Gun. They wanted these kind of movies where you felt when you came out of it. Like, you know, you couldn't have Rocky end the way it did in the original film. That's why by Rocky 2 and 3, he had to win. Right? Like,
wasn't it like really? It was like Reaganism that really brought in this spirit of like
that's what he meant.
Patriotism, bombastic, over the top, like awesomeness. You know, and that's why you got it was usually the all conquering American hero that won the day in the 80s movies.
And no, he's not the end all be all. But to his credit, he also did point out that now is worse than then anyway. So
way worse.
It's nice that some people are catching up.
Yeah. and they're not taking any chances now. It's worse than it's ever been.
Well, this is why it might, to go back to your point about what's going to supersede superhero movies. I've heard people suggest that it might be video game adaptations now. Like, we've reached that point where we're actually capable of making pretty good adaptations of things.
I would argue, I don't know if those will ever work, because I think the stories work better in the games. As somebody who doesn't game, but like, isn't that more experiential? Like, if you're there and you're controlling the story instead of seeing somebody else's interpretation of it.
This is why
I think so.
Like, there's always be better, but because they'll especially adapt successful games. But think about it: House of the Dragon did really well deserved. Last of Us did better. So it looks like we may be. Mario's going to make over $1 billion. Everyone's been saying it.
Yeah.
Like. If that launches like the Nintendo Cinematic Universe,
the Last of Us talk died down towards the end to me.
I'm not gonna. I would say that I think House of the Dragon talk lasted longer. I'm just saying the view counts ended up surpassing House of the Dragon, and they're rushing season 2 already, because that's happening if they think like I know like the reason I assume they're rushing it from a corporate standpoint is they're like, holy fuck, this thing made money, people like this.
But House of the Dragon also had Game of Thrones season 8. It did
exactly, yeah,
and it still managed to do. And I think House of the Dragon season 2 will do a lot better.
On the video game thing, I think you're right that they're going to try to do some more video games, because you're right, Mario is going to possibly be the biggest film of this year. It has that potential. And on the other side, Last of Us has been getting a lot of talk. So I think they're going to attempt, but I think the problem, and this is just my opinion, I think the problem they have now is the opposite problem they had of back in the day when they tried to adapt video games. Back then, it was because they didn't have much to work with. That's why the Mario movie from '93 is so batshit crazy, because they didn't really have much of an established universe, right? Like, it was just kind of randomness. But now you have overly like Bibles basically worth of stuff with tons of games and all these. Like, look at what happened with the Mortal Kombat movie that came out 2 years ago. Nobody could just enjoy it for what it was, because they're like, oh, it didn't follow this continuity of the games. It's like, well, most of us have not played those 20 games, guys. Most of us have not picked up a Mortal Kombat game since Mortal Kombat 3. Like,
I think something like Mortal Kombat was always going to be difficult to weave into a movie, because it doesn't really have a narrative. It's a fucking fighting tournament game, and it's just want to see people get their fucking skulls ripped out of their body. But
as a guy who's played a lot of Mortal Kombat, you're so wrong, but for the right reason, I would say like the Mortal Kombat is heavy with narrative.
Don't you tell me what I am, Mauler.
You know what's the best part, Mauler? Have you ever read the original script? You know what sucks is if we'd have got the original script, more people probably would have liked that movie. The guy who wrote Wonder Woman 84 came in and destroyed that script, though.
It doesn't surprise me.
Well, to take a more conventional example, say if you were to, The Last of Us was a good example of a very narrative-driven game, and so that's relatively easy to adapt because you've got a linear plot like there. In theory, something like the Uncharted games should have been really easy to adapt.
Yep.
Because they've got like classic adventure stories with like well-developed characters, good action sequences that you could adapt quite easily. They just fucked it up because they tried to tell an original story with completely the wrong casting.
With a little boy. Yeah,
in theory that should have worked really well. But like you could take something like the Metal Gear Solid games, for example, or things like that can be done because they've got very strong narrative woven through them. And I think maybe The Last of Us is going to open the floodgates to that.